It's not Midrashei Halacha that tells us how to keep Shabbat or Yom Kippur.
Sure.
But they were extracting laws from the Torah itself. I mentioned in the class the other day that the Sadducees also believed in the oral law. It's a misconception that the Sadducees didn't believe in the oral law. The Sadducees didn't believe in is what was called the tradition of the fathers, which is what we call Midrash nowadays. The problem they had was with the Pharisees, or those who weren't Sadducees, extracting laws from legends instead of laws from the Torah itself, which is what Midrashei Halacha is.
Really? I mean, I was always under the impression, I know a lot of scholars kind of point that the Sadducees are really, well, the Karaites are like children of the Sadducees, obviously generations upon generations, but...
Karaites arose in around the 9th century. The Sadducees disappeared after the destruction of the Second Temple. So you're talking about 135 of the Common Era.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. There's, hundreds upon hundreds of years, but, you have several scholars that they'll say like...
But these scholars don't read the Talmud, because the Talmud...
Yeah, I guess. True, you're right.
The Talmud says that the Sadducees sat on the Sanhedrin, to the point that the Sadducees, at a point, also had their own Sanhedrin.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up next. As some people say, it was two Sanhedrins, and
so they were developing civil law for the Jewish people, but they didn't believe in halakha. The people who make these statements are people who read Josephus in the New Testament without a Talmudic understanding of how Jewish law actually works.
True, agree.
The issue is really the same issue that people have nowadays. Rabbis not being able to distinguish midrashim from halakha. This has been our biggest problem, like really from the time of the Maccabees, when they compiled the books of the prophets, to bring in all these extracurricular ideas, at least interpreted in that manner, that changed Judaism. This is why that was the birth of sectarianism. If it wasn't for midrashim, we wouldn't have Christianity or Islam.
I believe that.
Like all these concepts about Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, it's all midrashim. I'm not saying they're bad, but it's just legend. Even the notion of Mashiach is more of a legend. Resurrection of the dead is more of a legend. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying it's not literally in the Torah. Literally. That's it. Now, some midrashim might be true, but it's just like we can't run a religion like that. And that only because there's a legend that's going to become doctrinal. And the Rambam's going to include it in his 13 principles of faith, which is just more his opinion than anything.
Yeah, like I said, I love halakha. I study halakha every day, and that's really the go-to place. But like I said, my struggle is accepting minhagim or not. Should we? Some minhagim, you have ancient minhagim, and you have more of the modern day minhagim. And, of course, I focus on Torah and halakha totally. It's just when you get to minhagim, it's like, it seems like it should be fluid, but at the same time, I don't know, I'm
not against people taking that literally or taking it to heart, as long as you're not going to exclude people. It's easy to get kicked out of a synagogue nowadays just because you disagree with Medrash. Isn't that really Midrash? Like you said, Midrash is really properly used on how the Christians use it. Right? Christians or Messianics are always like, oh, let's Midrash, right? I mean, that's really what it means.
That doesn't...
to study Torah, the Drash. That we call Midrashim nowadays, in Talmudic times, was called Agadah. When the books called Midrash Rabbah, and the reason it's called Midrash Rabbah is because they were the Midrashim of Rabbah, right? It's not just like the big Midrashim. Rabbah was in Amara. That changed the whole notion of how we view folklore and legend. So folklore and legend that appears outside the Talmud is called Midrashim, and folklore and legend that appears within the Talmud is called Agadah, but it's pretty much the same thing. But it's confusing with Midrashei Halacha, which are halachot that come from the Drash, and the Drash is the Torah.
All right.
Yeah. All right, let's keep it going. Heck, come on.
You got a second wind?
Let's go.
I got a question, Rabbi Asher.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of, if we go ahead and I guess use your rationale, is it safe to say that it's not even incumbent on Jews to even believe in the 13 principles of faith?
Correct.
By Maimonides?
That's right. There's a book written by Rabbi Mark Shapiro called The Limits of Orthodox Theology. And he brings down many, many rabbis, contemporaries, especially of the Rambam, who were against the Rambam in his Yud Gimel Karamuna, saying that this is what a Jew must believe. And there's many rabbis who contradicted the Rambam, like the Radbaz. So the Radbaz says that there's actually nothing that a Jew has to believe in outside of God, but he just has to keep the Torah. There's another opinion, Rabbi Yosef Albo, which is Sefer HaIkarim. He says there's only 3 things that a Jew has to believe in. So let me see if I remember that. Let me see. Torah, prophecy. Yeah. The Rambam was a Rishon. But this notion of Rishonim and Achronim, that's not even a real thing. It's something that people invented. For example, the Rambam didn't know he was a Rishon. And the Rambam wasn't called Rambam, by the way. And Rashi wasn't called Rashi. And the Ramban wasn't called the Ramban. All these little acronyms were developed maybe 200, 300 years ago. Why? Because the title rabbi didn't exist back then. That's why Yemenites don't call their teachers rabbi. They'll call him Mori, or some other, like other Sephardi Jews, they'll call him Chacham. But the Rambam was just giving over his opinion. Now I know, yes, we have Yigdal, and we have the Ani Mamin and all this stuff in our prayers, but this was added in later on, much, much later on. And that's just what it became. But there are no 13 principles of faith from a binding perspective. Now, there's portions within the 13 principles that are binding, like the notion of prophecy, that God will send us prophets, the notion of Moses being the greatest prophet, and that his prophecy is different from everyone else's form of prophecy, the belief in mitzvot. I don't think the notion of reward and punishment is a principle, just because it's not, unless you're going to tie it to the reward and punishment in this world, but he specifically says an afterlife. His notion of Mashiach is not the notion today of Mashiach. In Sefer Mitzvot, he ties the command to believe in a Messiah only in the command to have a king. He teaches like Shmuel. Shmuel's in the Gemara, he says that in that portion of Perichelek, that in the Messianic age, nothing is going to be different from that age than the age we're in now.
I remember that.
With the exception that the Jews are just going to be able to, at least for a time, live in peace and basically, study Torah in peace. So that shows that his Messiah and his Messianic age does not resemble the craziness that's being taught nowadays. That the Messiah is not going to die, but that the Messiah is going to be able to read your thoughts, that the Messiah is going to come in the clouds. The Rambam doesn't teach us. So the same one, with the same person who brought down the 13 principles of faith, and mind you, the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam, as it appears, really doesn't exist in his Parashah Mishnayot. The 13 principles of faith was extracted from the Rambam's introduction to Perichelek, to Masechet Sanhedrin, chapter 98. It's a whole long book, and then someone abridged it into 13 principles, especially in the way that we have it in Yigdal nowadays or the Ani Mamin. If for some reason that you have an issue with one of his principles and how it appears in the 13 principles, go back to the text, because I'm pretty sure it looks nothing on how the abridged version looks like.
Interestingly enough, the Yigdal is not in Nusach. It looks like they took it out.
Oh, that's interesting. When Nusach Harila, you mean Chabad?
Yes, it's not in Tili Hashem.
The Techiliyat Hashem recites the Ani Mamin. But the 13 principles are in Techiliyat Hashem. It's just not, they don't sing Yigdal before the shul ends. They still recite the 13 principles.
I'll double check, but I don't remember seeing it.